they'll do a question, they get the wrong answer, they look at the right answer, they read it and they say, oh, that makes so much sense. And then they move on to the next question, where at that point, there's nothing being fixed.
You're not getting anywhere unless you have the foundations.
Not that I need to learn stuff. I just need to do things. And I was like, that's it. You just need to change the way that you approach the question. And I was like, that's all it is. And it's not a big change. It's just not, it's not something that you're used to, right? Looking for the right answer is not the best move because your brain starts to make the wrong answers correct. They'll tell us, I've been reading all my life. I know how to read. No, you read with your eyes, but you don't read with your brain. The idea that you need to realize that you have to do something different in order to do well on the SATs. Otherwise, things are not going to change.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe. Today, we are joined by, I guess, somewhat famous because we both recognize each other from each other's ads, but Mr. Patrick Choi, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me, Dr. Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. And you've built, is it KYO Standard? Is that
the word is KYO.
KYO.
The word KYO is, or the character KYO in Chinese, Korean, and Japanese means education. So
okay, very cool.
Yes, why not?
I gotcha. So basically, education standard, right? Around the idea that test prep should be strategic, which we love to hear, not just repetitive.
Right.
What does that actually look like in practice?
So, I mean, in practice, it comes down to coming up with a way that a student can answer a question consistently. Right. So, having a kind of a way to do it, as opposed to when you're doing a ton of practice questions, it's just repetition. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you get it wrong. There's nothing for you to change in order to do better. The way that most students do questions is they'll do a question, they get the wrong answer, they look at the right answer, they read it and they say, oh, that makes so much sense. And then they move on to the next question, where at that point, there's nothing being fixed, right? It's just you recognize that the right answer is the right answer.
Right.
But there's nothing else kind of going on. So, it's making sure that you have a way to approach every question so that if something doesn't work, so if you're not getting the question right, there's a way to go back and fix what you're doing wrong, right? So then you can make an adjustment of some sort.
So just to give everyone the proper introduction, you are an SAT expert. You just told me you've been doing this since 1999. Tell me the journey and how you got started, I assume as a tutor, but basically built a brand and a company now supporting hundreds, if not thousands of kids in SAT and ACT prep.
Well, so, I mean, it started because, one of my fraternity brothers, he was teaching for the Princeton review, and he was just like, hey, you did really well on the SATs. Do you want to tutor for the SAT, for the Princeton review? It was $15 an hour. Back then, I think the minimum wage was, $5 an hour. So I was like,
sure.
Yes, of course. So I started doing that. And then, I think I mentioned to you that I was really bad at it in the beginning. I'm not afraid to admit that. So, but I didn't like the fact that I was bad at something. So after I taught my first class, I just got my friends, grabbed people off the street and just said, hey, come in, sit down. I'm going to teach you some SAT stuff. Ask me any questions that you might have. And the more I started to do that, the more confident I got with that. And then after graduation, I started working full time, but I was always tutoring on the side, just because I couldn't shake it. and then I quit my full time job, became the director of operations for the Princeton Review, and then after a year and a half of that, they moved me out to South Korea, where I ran their Korea, China, and Japan office for a couple of years. And then I left that and went back to the U.S. for grad school. But by then, I'd become their premier tutor and their master trainer. So I was training tutors. I was taking on kind of the high profile clients and stuff. After doing that for about another 10 years, I started to realize that I no longer really needed the Princeton review. I was bringing in my own students. I was using my own material, and everything else. And so I was like, what? I'm just going to leave and start my own thing. And so I did that. And I think it was in 2016 is when I started my own company. And it was just me and a WeWorks with 2 or 3 tutors, just kind of tutoring kids. And then up until the pandemic, we actually had a full building in San Diego. We were working with I think 300 students at that time. And things were going pretty well until the pandemic hit, and then all the schools made the test optional. So all the parents were like, hey, we're not going to take the test. And
right.
You had to start all over again. So.
Well, yeah, because mine I came out of I started tutoring again. I was actually in-person tutor when I was teaching in Virginia, and then I stopped for a little bit when I moved back to PA, and I went back to virtual tutoring during the pandemic, and kind of the same thing, broke away, did my own thing, but really had no business for a while until we kind of niched down to APs and through a Facebook group. But it's interesting you bring up that score optional because, you know, I've had a couple of college coaches, a friend of mine, like explain it really well. But that must have been, after COVID, must have been a big windfall to you, knowing that all the common data sets, the kids who did submit their scores when it was score optional, skewed the average scores to higher. So now like a 1500 is absolutely required and you're the 1500 guy, right?
Well, yeah. It was kind of funny because I was looking at some schools and I'm like, that's their average SAT score? Since when?
Right.
Like, that's kind of so yeah, it did kind of skew the scores. And I think the scores are all going to kind of settle down a little bit more this year and in the next couple of years, just because now they're making it required. So
back to mandatory. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess was there like a specific student or a moment when you realized like deep conceptual understanding beats rote memorization? And like the skills over the process of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I still tutor, one or two students.
Really?
Just because I feel, like as the test changes, as a student kind of, the student body changes, I need to be there because, that my best ideas come to me when I'm tutoring, just because I'll say like, oh, wow, you're really struggling with this. How can I help you understand that better? And then so tutoring is kind of, it's in my blood. I just can't get away from it. But, just even, recently, I had a student who after about 5 sessions, he was like, wait, so I know everything. And I was like, yes. He's like, I just need to do things differently. Right. And I'm like, yes. He's like, so it's not that I need to learn stuff. I just need to do things. And I was like, that's it. You just need to change the way that you approach the question. And I was like, that's all it is. And it's not a big change. It's just not it's not something that you're used to doing. And I, when he said that, I was just like, can I get this on camera somewhere? So I can show this to other kids. But yeah, that's, like every time I tutor a student, it comes down to, after a while, I'm like when I talk to them, I say, okay, so when you do a reading question, after you read the passage, do you write down what you think the right answer is going to look like? And they say, oh, kind of. I'm like, do you, when you look at the answer choices, are you looking for the right answer or are you looking for what makes it wrong? And they'll say the right answer or things of that sort. So when I ask questions and then I know what their answers are going to be, people are like, how do you know these answers? And I'm like, I know them because you're doing everything that everybody else does. Right? Looking for the right answer is not the best move because your brain starts to make the wrong answers correct. Right. Whereas, like if you look for a pink shirt in a room, everything's going to look very pink. Right. So, so if you're looking for what makes the answer choice wrong, then it turns everything into a very critical way of looking at something. And so, just all these things kind of help me point me towards just doing the questions over and over again. It works for some, but not for the most, for the majority of the students out there. So
that's some like Tony Robbins stuff right there. Because I did a little bit of SAT tutoring. I did so many different odd jobs when I was a teacher. And so when I was in Virginia, I taught. I got hooked up with this Korean school in the summer. And it was like, can you tutor the SAT? I'm like, yeah, I can. Absolutely. How hard can it be? And I was like, what do they want to do? They just want to do practice problems. I'm like, that's it? And they just time them and just give them the feedback on the answers. I'm like, okay. But it was like drill and kill. That's the program they wanted to run. And I'm just like, this is a horrible way to spend a summer as a kid. This seems like absolute torture. So it doesn't sound like you do that, but it did. But I also chased the money in terms of the proctoring because as a teacher, you could proctor the essays. It's like $125 an hour. I'm like, I can get all my grading done on a Saturday. This is fantastic. Not 100. It was, I forget how much it was. It was like $250 for the Saturday, whatever. It was back then. It was nice. Like it was a nice little chunk of change, but
good extra,
there was like 7 sections and then they moved to 3 sections. They did so many different changes. They took the writing out, they put the writing back in, things like that. But now it's fully digital.
Right.
And it's an adaptive test. How has that changed the game for the strategies kids need and how it's changed your approach to test prep?
Well, so it changes, but it also doesn't change. So one thing to kind of keep in mind is that the score is still you can still predict the score. So what I mean by that is that if you get all the easy and the medium questions right, then you're generally going to be about a 600 plus on the actual test. Regardless of like the test adapting to the harder module and everything else. But as far as like prepping for the test, we try to transfer paper and pencil to online. So for example, in the beginning, we have a lot of our students do a lot of their work on a PDF, showing all their work, writing down their predictions, seeing where we cross off the word or phrase that makes sense or is wrong. And then as they start to get better at that, then we start to transfer them over to the digital version to say, okay, now either take notes or just kind of keep it in your head, right? Like your prediction is this, and so on and so forth. So we are able to do that. The other kind of weird thing is, for example, I took the June SAT in last year, me and one of my tutors. And I remember during the math section, I was like, wow, there are things I haven't seen before.
Wait, like you legit took it like as a student?
Yeah, as a student, yeah.
Okay.
I've taken these, I think, 17 times. I've taken these like 15 times now. But, I remember sitting there going, we don't teach this. We got to start teaching vertex, and vectors and things like that. And when I got out of the class, when I got out of the test, I talked to my tutor and he was like, oh, that was an easy math section. I was like, okay, well, then I'm obviously rusty. And then we both got our scores and we got the exact same math score. And I was like, that's not fair. I feel like I worked harder for my math score than you did.
Right.
So, I think the SATs are still trying to figure things out too, as far as question types and level of difficulties and things like that.
So seems like you're an early adopter of social media, YouTube to teach things, Instagram as a primary teaching tool. Obviously, your ads are on social media. How do you see that in terms of content creation, reshaping how students actually learn outside of school?
Well, I mean, I think it's, shorter attention span, right? Social media kind of feeds to that shorter attention span. And then I also think that the students nowadays, they're very good at taking a little bit and taking it a long way with that. Right. So I've seen students that, you teach them one thing on a post, and then for the next, they try it and they really do apply it. And then they start asking me questions on my Instagram page. And I'm like, hey, let's just hop on a call real quick and let me walk you through some stuff. But, it's interesting because now these students are being exposed to things that they would have had to pay for a course to do or whatever. Right. But now I think there's more exposure to all of that. But, of course, nothing kind of trumps the consistent work that you have to put into that.
So obviously AI has brought a whole new meaning to change in education, and their tools are popping up everywhere. There's a lot of SAT aligned AI apps as well. But what can a human strategist like you do for that the algorithm can't?
Right. Well, I think the algorithm, like AI is a great tool by all means. And I think, for example, there's a company called Acely. They say that they give you different levels of difficulty and things of that sort. And I think conceptually it's a great idea because if your student is bad with vertex formula or quadratic formulas, for example, then you can start off with an easy problem and increase the level of difficulty and things like that. But I also think that a human should be there to be able to say, hey, let's try this, because you're trying to affect the behavior of how a student approaches a question. So, for example, one of our students, he just couldn't predict he just never predicted the answer before he looked at the answer choices. So, my tutors and I came up with the idea of just putting Post-it notes over all the answer choices. So then he has to write his prediction onto the Post-it note and then peel it off and then compare the note with his prediction to the answer choices. So I think, it's a great tool, but ultimately you do need somebody there to oversee the progress and make sure that these adjustments are being made when they're doing them. So
I guess families can get overwhelmed. I'm sure you see a lot of maybe sophomores, but probably more juniors than anything, getting that panic as college app season's right around the corner, especially March, right? Yeah, the juniors are taking the SAT in March, or I don't know why. Why does College Board offer the SAT in May, a day before the AP exam? So listen. We offer SAT support, but we're not offering anything in May. I do not support you taking the SAT. So sorry, I don't support you taking the SAT.
I always tell students and parents that you're gone in May. I don't expect to see you until at least the second week when all the APs are done.
It's just like, I don't know why they insist on having that exam that time, but parents get overwhelmed by the process. I'm sure, again, we share a lot of probably the same parents, the potential clients, same students in our shared adventures of business. And so there's just a lot of noise out there. You're in California. There's tons of college prep companies out there. How does a parent who's overwhelmed with all the different, there's free resources, there's AI tools. What's honest filter? How do you sort out what's noise and what's actually worthwhile?
Well, so I think that a lot of people, especially in like the online space, they're always trying to come up with a gimmick to sink you in, right? So they'll say like, oh, you take a test and we can tell you exactly what 14 topics we need to go over. And, it's for something like that. Well, if you take another test, those 14 things might shift to another 14 things, right? And so, I think it's who do you trust working with? Who do you feel comfortable with? But then also that there has to be a system that the person's trying to work on, right? Because otherwise, you kind of run into the mistake of having a tutor just giving you a bunch of drills, right? Drill and grill them, or even just teachers teaching you how to do problems that you got wrong, right? In which case, that doesn't necessarily help the student. It just helps them with that particular question, but it doesn't help them answer that question type, for example, right? So, I think that at the end of the day, you have to find a system that makes sense to you, right? That makes sense to your student. Oh, I think my kid can do this and things of that sort, right? I think that's ultimately the biggest thing when it comes to picking a test prep company to work with.
So you focus on score optimization and what are the key variables that determine whether a student's score can jump 50 points to 200 points?
Oh, that comes down to personality. I think there's when I used to do all the onboarding, I would tell the students, hey, we're going to teach you some things. And in your mind, you're going to say, this is silly. In your mind, you're going to say, this isn't going to work. But you have to try them because they do work, right? And so a lot of students, when I tell them when we teach them how to read a certain way, they'll tell us, I've been reading all my life. I know how to read. No, you read with your eyes, but you don't read with your brain. And we're trying to teach you how to read with your brain. And so the students who kind of embrace that, they generally start to do better. The students who fight that are always looking for a easier way to do something. Like, they'll say, hey, isn't the main idea always the last sentence? It's not always the last sentence. That's why you have to read like this, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the attitude, and it's also important to remember that we're not necessarily teaching the students anything new. We're reminding them of a lot of things that they forgot. So a lot of times when we do, for example, linear equations with one variable, a lot of students will say, yeah, I'm good with that. And I'm like, no. When you're seeing it, your brain is like, yeah, I've done this before. I'm okay. But when you look at the test scores, you're getting a lot of those questions wrong. So then where is that disconnect happening? That's what you have to do, right? So, I think it comes down to a lot of it's just the attitude.
So why can't families just grab a Princeton review book or a Kaplan review book or a standard, go to a standard tutoring center? What is the structural gap that you're solving and how the test prep industry operates? What are you doing that is fundamentally different that you get the results that you guys get consistently?
So we address the problem from 3 different stages. So we focus on content first, then strategy, and then the pacing. So when a student comes in with a very low score, so something below 1200, for example, that's not very low, but anything below 1200, we usually put them into our foundation program where they learn all the basic stuff, right? Learning how to read, the grammar, the basic math, algebra, things of that sort. And then the goal for that is to get through all the easy questions pretty comfortably. And then by the time they do that, they're usually in the high 1100s. And then we put them into our strategy course where we go over pretty much a process to answer every question, right? So, and that process can change based on the student and what the tutor thinks that the student needs and things of that sort. But the point of that, the strategy portion is to increase your accuracy. So every question that you answer, you got that one right. And then timing doesn't matter at that point because we're trying to create a system that is accurate. Now, once you've reached an accuracy that you're comfortable with, so like let's say 9 out of every 10 reading questions you get right, then we shift you over to the Ivy program where now it's just pacing. We're trying to finish that section with that level of accuracy until you get to the score you want. And so, those are the kind of the big fundamental differences. Most other companies that I've worked with or classes that I've taken, they usually just have one program, one course, and just that's kind of it. The other thing is that our program, you can do a group class every week, or you can do a recorded lesson if you want. But in addition to that, you always get a 1 hour one-on-one tutoring session each week. And the purpose of that is to make sure that you're okay with the homework, that you're doing the homework, and any questions that come up or any adjustments that need to be made, our tutors can help you make that adjustment. But ultimately, it also just comes down to the student being exposed to the same thing multiple times, right? Because it's, they learn it in class, and how much do you really learn in class? And then they go off and do something, and they do it on their own. Whereas when they meet with their tutor, the tutor kind of reins them back in and say, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it, remember? And then we can kind of fix that from there. So
what do you find is the biggest myth in the test prep industry right now, or something trendy that's a good marketing ploy, but is actually horrible for parents and students?
Well, I think the biggest one is a lot of people feel like they need to work on their weakness. So like, for example, if you're scoring a 700 on math and a 640 on the reading, most people's first instinct is, I need to work on my reading. My instinct is, let's get that 700 to an 800, right? Or as close to that 800 as possible, because the odds of you increasing over 100 points in the reading section in a short period of time, it's not, it could happen, but it also could not happen. Whereas if you're scoring a 700 in the math, getting to a 780, 790 is not as hard now, because we do know you're probably just getting the last two questions wrong, the hardest questions wrong. We can kind of shift our focus into breaking down harder questions. And so if they can get like a 780 or 790 and maybe and 710 or 720 on the reading, you're breaking the 1500 right there. Right. And so it's a little bit different. But I think that's one of the biggest things, is that they always want to focus on the things that they're bad at, as opposed to, let's take a look at what you're good at and see if that can also help. Right.
So, we're, like you said, we're ending the era of test optional. But that's still lingering, is out there. And we work with some college admission students, and I'm like, listen, there's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot, and competition is fierce, obviously, but I'm like, you're not getting anywhere unless you have the foundations, and the foundations academically are a good GPA, 3.7 unweighted GPA, a good SAT or ACT score, and we're taught, depending on what school, it could be 1400, it could be 1500, and good AP exams. If you don't have that, you don't have to spend $6,000 on a passion project, because your foundation is wrong. So competition is fiercer than ever. What is a real story families need to hear about whether testing still matters for either of our exams?
Well, so I think testing still matters, because at the end of the day, you're giving colleges more data points for you. Right? Because, like you say, I have a good GPA. That's great. But how do we verify that? Right. And things of that sort. So I think at the end of the day, I had, I can tell you stories of like parents who said, your kid doesn't need to take SATs because he's applying test optional, has good grades and everything else. This was especially during the COVID time. And they were applying to Northeastern, and they thought they were a shoo-in, and they just got rejected. Whereas like another student, sub grades, worse grades than the other student, almost similar GPA. They submitted an SAT score. I think it was like 1380 or something, and he got accepted to Northeastern at that time. Now I think Northeastern, their average SAT score is like 1490 or something like that.
Probably, yeah.
Northeastern's kind of like a Cinderella.
Because all those kids weren't submitting scores; they just skewed upwards.
Yep. But at that point, it's. I know that it's a tedious thing. I know that it's an extra stress that you don't necessarily need in your life. But at the end of the day, the more information you give to colleges, the better the decision that they can make. Right.
Well, and you got to work for Princeton Review, so you got to see it from kind of like the king of who does the test prep process. But it's like, I don't understand where I do and I don't. I work inside of school, so I see it. We're great. It's like paper chasing grades, right? So we're so scared. Like, I get a lot of kids usually around. I'm starting to. It's becoming more geared towards the AP exam. March is like our busiest month usually for enrollments, but I would say probably November to about February is when you get kids reacting to a low grade in the class. And so it's so hard because they're like, my kid has a B. I'm like, okay. And it's like, well, their GPA, like they're it's terrible. I don't know what's wrong. Well, they have a B in a college level class. They're in ninth grade. So okay. But it does. I mean, it's hard because the system is telling you the grades are the only thing that matters. And I'm telling you, the grade honestly means nothing to me. It's really what you can do is skills wise. Right. So But at the same token of like, I have a lot of like, they don't prioritize the AP exam and they prioritize the grade saving. Oh, I'm like, the AP exam it's better to have a lower grade in the class and do better on the exam than do really like have a straight A, but bomb the exam. Right. So the SAT, obviously there's not a class. It is, right? It's literally you're taking the SAT. It's measuring how well you take the SAT in terms of math and reading, right? So, my kid has good grades. I'm sure you hear that a lot. My kid's a bright student. What is like that belief breaking system for families who maybe aren't converted to your methods? And like walk me through a success story where you had to have that transformation happen and they embrace what you taught.
Well, so I think a good chunk of our students, they come in with, my kid has a 4.8 GPA or something to that effect. And, we do our best to explain to them that at the end of the day, a grade in school is very different from doing well on one exam on one Saturday at 9 a.m. and just kind of putting it all out there, right? And I think the reason why the test it stays around for so long is because unlike school where if you don't do well on a test, the teacher can drop the lowest grade, or you can do extra credit, or you can do extra. Your grade is a culmination of a semester's long work, whereas on the SATs, it's just it all comes down to one day. And I also think that the other difference is that students who get good grades are very resistant to trying different things to get better to do better on the SATs. And so I think it all kind of comes down to, at the end of the day, the idea that you need to realize that you have to do something different in order to do well on the SATs. Otherwise, things are not going to change. And it's unfair and everything else. But I had one student. He was trying to get into. He's in New York City, and he's trying to get into, I think, Binghamton. And his he had this very attitude of like, I have a 4.3. I'm good. Like I don't really need to take the test, or I don't really need to study for the test. And and I after a while I told his mom, I was like, listen, he's it's December of his junior year. Let's take a couple of months off. Let's take a few months, just kind of let him grow up a little bit. Let him see his friends taking the test, doing better. Let him see all the seniors getting accepted or rejected. And let's kind of make that, hopefully make this a little bit more solid for him. And when he came back to us in March, he was just ready to go because he was like, wow, a lot of my friends who I thought were going to get into these schools got rejected from these schools. And, they like at the end of the day, I think it all came down to the SAT. So, that's when he started to turn things around and was just like, I need to change this. I need to do things differently, and so on. And so that, that's kind of the end result of that.
So what is the greatest like ROI story you have of a family who invested in that? And
I mean, just a couple, like 2 years ago, I had one of our students. She texted me. She's like, "Oh, I got I got a $70,000 a year scholarship." I forgot which school. I can't remember. It wasn't like it wasn't a top 25, but it was pretty well known. And I remember and the dad called me and he was like, "Hey, we got this scholarship." And I was like, "So you owe me $280,000. And he was like, "Oh no," he's like, he's like, "Yeah, no." I'm like, "Yeah, of course not." But
yeah, right.
Like he was like, that scholarship was pretty much based on her GPA and her SATs.
Right. Right.
That's it. Like I helped with half, and I'm glad we can do it. Right. So
yeah,
at the end of the day, the return is incredible when it comes to something like this. So
I think it's so. I don't know if you still get on like acquisition calls and talking. I'm sure you have a team that takes care of it too, but there's some investing resistance to it too. It's just like because we have an ad that's like we had a student spend $3,000 on our core program and got $240,000 in scholarships across multiple schools, and it's like, so it's like, but they don't. It's like. I don't know why some don't understand you're going to pay one way or the other, but there are some strategies to do it, and kind of stacking these things, you can significantly bring down the cost. But that's $70,000. That's amazing. So what did you do before you got into test prep?
Before, I was just a college student. And before that, I was worked for Starbucks as a manager, as a district manager in New York City. So I did that. So I was in operations a lot, just in retail. But then like I said, I always kept tutoring on the side. By the time I had graduated, I was tutoring for the LSATs, the MCATs, GMATs, GREs, SATs.
Oh, wow. You do them all.
Kind of doing them all. So, I was that guy running around New York City, tutoring every, just kind of doing as many kids as I can at that point.
So you basically kind of niched down in the age of digital marketing and just had people just focus on the SAT and ACT.
Yeah. It's the part that I'm the most passionate about. My team will tell you that I'm always coming up with different things to try. Just because I see a problem, like let's get this. So let's try to fix that. And then, right, there's a barrier for here. Let's fix that. And so we're always kind of coming up with different ways of improving the program and helping the students. So
what, do you get families that come and say, hey, we want to take both the SAT and ACT for our kids? Like, what is your advice for that? Because I get some of those too. Like, we should take all.
Yeah. I mean, I had one kid. She got into a BSMD program, but she got a 36 on the ACT with us. And then the mom's like, great, now I want a 1600. And I'm like, guys, that's what you want, lightning to strike twice? So right. I was like, sure. So we worked with them until that, and she eventually did get it. But ultimately, my general answer is always that, pick one and kind of go all in. And I think a lot of parents, when you have the students take an SAT and an ACT, their general idea is, whichever they score the highest in is the one that we're going to go with, which I definitely disagree with. I say whichever the one the student felt the most comfortable with is the one that we're going to go with. Mostly because I think the SATs, after a while, it's got such a huge presence that it just has a very bad vibe to it. Whereas if you say, it's like, fresh breath of fresh air, I'm trying something different, new question types, new, whatever, it can make the world of difference to a student.
Do you?
So it's.
Sorry. I mean, I was going to say, do you change that answer depending on what schools they're aiming for?
No. So the school, my understanding is all the schools accept the SAT and the ACT equally. And so it's, at the end of the day, I think that it's whichever one they're going to get the highest score in.
Okay. Good. Interesting. Okay. And, obviously, like AI has been super disruptive to the industry. How are you using AI? How are you protecting against AI? Like what are you doing just business wise, education wise to adapt to the changing world that we're in right now?
Well, so we're actually about to launch our AI homework helper.
Okay.
And so one of the problems with the way that students do work is that if you tell them to do X, Y, and Z, they go home, they're not going to do X, Y, and Z. They're going to try it maybe once. Then they fall back to their old habits of just doing it the way that they're used to doing it. And so our AI homework helper is going to kind of push them through the process, right? First step, paraphrase the sentence. The second step, predict the answer. And if the prediction is wrong, then it makes them go back and say, okay, let's work on the paraphrasing part. What does it say? What does it say? And then kind of just get them throughout the whole process, right? So that they are doing things a certain way. Because ultimately that's the thing that matters. That's the biggest difference. So I think that, then things like that are going to help us with but as far as, kind of over tutoring, I don't know if I trust it, you have to kind of understand this response, facial tics, things, there's just, there's a lot of things that you kind of have to see either.
We really didn't get into like your coaching program and how it's structured, but like I still, at the end of the day, you still need a one-on-one person. Like I can't break away from that. Like there is human aspect that you need that person overseeing it. So I don't know if that'll ever change, but Patrick, we're going to come to the point where we have rapid fire. So basically just ask you questions and whatever comes to your mind, answers, no justification needed unless you want to. Okay. Sound good. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So Patrick, what's the most overrated piece of test prep advice?
Take the blue book test. So the real ones. So yeah. Okay.
One thing parents overthink about the SAT or ACT.
That there's a difference between a 1540 and a 1550, for example. So, like the differences are not as big as you think they are. Okay. At a certain point, you're good. So,
okay. One thing dangerously underthink.
The fact that their kid does well in school is good enough that they'll do well on the SATs. So,
favorite resource you hand a student starting prep tomorrow?
Favorite resource? Gosh. The New York Times. I strongly believe reading makes the world of difference. So just read. Like the more you read, the better that you do on these exams.
One thing you'd whisper to a parent of a 9th grade student about a testing strategy to get them ready for their 11th grade year?
Have them learn to read with their eyes and not with their read with their brain and not with their eyes.
Ooh, okay. And one thing AI will never replace in test preparation?
A good tutor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even with Elon and Skynet?
You try, but, I think it's just, connection makes all the difference. Like our tutors, like, this isn't school. You don't have to be so rigid. Connect with this, right? Because you're getting them to do extra work. Right. So you have to be able to be relatable to them, right?
Have to have a relationship with them. Sure.
Yeah, because it's not like they're going to get a bad grade or, they're going to go on a permanent record or anything like that.
Sure.
You have to convince them to do things. So each tutor is a salesperson, essentially. So.
Okay. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on. Spend a little bit of time. I know you're like literally 2.5 weeks away from your big test in March for the spring one. If parents are interested in learning more about your programs and your offering, where can they find information? Like, where can they find you? What can you help?
Yeah. So just go to KYO Standard, KYO, and then the word standard.com, and then just click on the link to connect with us. And then we'll start messaging back and forth from there.
Awesome. And then your socials will include as well on this episode too. So, all right. So what's the next move for your company in terms of like where are you going now? Or you've done it so long, right? So like where's next steps?
So we're actually launching a reading program next week.
Okay.
So it's a program for middle school and high school students.
Okay.
Where we go over kind of like this, right? Like Charlotte's Web, Lord, and the process is going to be read, debate, discuss, debate, and then write. And so we're going to try to work on the students on, reading things a little bit more carefully, being able to analyze things, and then also ultimately just write about it. Because in our opinion, by the time a junior comes to us, if their reading is bad, it's hard. It's just a lot of work to fix. And I honestly believe that if you get the reading part down, then 80%, 60%, somewhere around there, the test is kind of manageable at that point. And so we wanted to provide support as early as we can to do that. So.
All right. Awesome. Well, again, Patrick, thank you for your time. It was great meeting you. Good luck with everything. And
you as well.
Absolutely. Good to finally meet you too. We'll see you next time.